Hey guys, thanks for watching, coming back, all that stuff. Hope you're having an awesome day. And I realized I haven't done a video about Aurora HDR in a while. It's been a dozen or so videos that I've done, Luminar and Photolemur and stuff. So I wanted to jump into Aurora HDR because even though I don't talk about it as much, I use it all the time and I love it. I love to create HDRs. They're fun, I think they're beautiful and they're interesting. So I'm gonna dive into one today, and here's the photo I'm gonna show you. There's the center exposure from the bracket set, and there's the final blended HDR. So I want to talk about that in the context of 5 different tips or sort of things that I keep in mind while creating an HDR photo. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so tip number 1 is to get the light right. Now, when you blend in HDR, generally speaking, the light is going to get balanced. That's really what it does. You take, well, in the case of me, I take 3 exposures, a dark, a medium, and a bright. And when you blend them together, what it does is balance out the light effectively. So this is my base blended HDR. There's the single middle exposure from the bracket set. So middle exposure and blended HDR without any edits made to it. I didn't deghost. I let the traffic that was passing go. I let the stuff on the river go and all that. I didn't want to do any deghosting. But I want to talk about getting the light right. And that starts for me with the HDR basic panel. So let me show you that. I'll go ahead and turn it on, and you can see just the difference that made, right? So before, kind of darker, and after, quite a bit brighter. And so that's the first thing I think about. Even though the blending process does create a more balanced look than any of the single exposures would have, I still want to come in and balance the lights. That's the first thing I think about. Here I made some temperature adjustments. As you can see, I warmed it up a little bit. Let me show you that one more time. That was really kind of cool. I'll often take photos and drag the temperature to the left to cool it off, but in this case I went to the right because that was fairly blue overall, and what I wanted was a little bit more of contrast between the warm and the cool colors, and so that helped by bringing the warmth up. Now we're going to bring back a little bit of the cool color here in a moment, and I'll show you that trick as well. Added some contrast, HDR enhance, and smart tone. Smart tone makes a huge difference in getting the light right. Let me show you without smart tone. Right? Let me show you without contrast, right? So that's where I was. I added contrast, which I think was about 25, and that makes it kind of dark, right? And so that's why Smart Tone is, to me, such a great filter. I think I was at about 49 or 50, but it really helps you to get the light right. So that's the first thing I think about. And now I've got a balanced photo with, I think, great distribution of light, even though it was shot kind of right around blue hour here in, there in London. I wanted to brighten it up and add a little bit more, even distribution of light to the scene. I may go back and change that later, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The second thing is to just be careful with your colors, right? So let me show you what I did with the colors there. I added a little bit of vibrance and a little bit of color contrast. Let me show you what color contrast does. Look at the sky. There it is without color contrast, and then I think I was at about 40 or something. I don't really know. That brings back some of the blue that I kind of lost in the basic panel, the first filter, when I warmed up the overall temperature. That color contrast helps to create some of that difference between the blues and the warmer tones here. The reason I say to be careful with colors is because, and I love color, I'll often find myself dragging it and I'll say, yeah, 45 looks pretty good, and get some color. Maybe I need a little saturation, and next thing you know, you got this crazy saturated. And I actually like that. It's overdone, but regardless, I like it. So what I'll often do is I'll say, well, Jim, hey, calm down, basically. It depends on what kind of look I'm going for, but generally I'm going for what I would consider enhanced realism. Like, I don't want it to be totally fake, but I want it to be like better than it was in reality. That's just how I edit. So color contrast helps a lot, and vibrance, I think, is good at that. Just be careful with some of those because you can quickly get overdone on the color. Okay, so the third thing that I think about is mood and crafting and sort of altering the mood. I think mood is important, and so I often do that with image radiance. And so let me just show you. There's with image radiance and there's without. Without is more even distribution of light, less shadow, more evenly lit, and I kind of like to start that way with my HDRs. But then image radiance brings back some of that shadow and that contrast, and I like that look, especially this time of day. So here's another thing I think about when shooting HDRs, which is not one of my 5 tips, but I don't really often create HDRs from brackets captured in the middle of the day when it's bright outside. You don't really need it, and B, it doesn't really work for me because you'll often end up overdoing the look of a photo that you didn't really need HDR for in the first place. To me, HDR is about balancing the light when you have a big contrast between what's bright and what's dark. And to me, that works better at the edges of the day. So sunrise and blue hour in the morning, sunset and blue hour in the evening, or even into the evening. Basically, low light situations. That's why I like image radiance, because it'll bring back some of that shadow. And I think naturally your eye is trained to expect that, because you would see the shadow, even though because of the dynamic range of human eyesight, you can see a lot better than our camera is going to capture. You still would expect to see some shadow when it's kind of edges of the day kind of light situation. And so without image radiance and with, just adds a little bit of mood, and I think mood's important, and that's why that's tip number 3. Okay, tip number 4 is details. And in this photo, I didn't actually add any detail. And that's because there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can do details boost, or you can do structure, which adds a little bit of that crunchiness. I'll often go with structure as opposed to the details boost. And so you can just come over here and kind of move that up. The thing is if you don't do it on its own layer, in Aurora, it's a global adjustment. And so that means it's going to impact the entire photo. You can see it bringing up detail in the sky and all the little dust spots that were apparently on my lens, maybe water spots, I'm not sure, but those can come out later. The point is, I often, if I do apply structure or detail enhancement to an HDR photo, I do it very gentle and I do it selectively. In this photo, I didn't even add any. And that's because the walkway there with all the cobblestones, it's got enough detail in it already. The camera captures it well, and I think when you blend the exposures together to create the HDR, it's going to bring up some of that look anyway. So that's why I don't really bring up detail or structure very much. And if I did, I would do it gently, and I would do it on a separate layer, and I would just paint it into some of the cobblestones, like maybe on that right side of the bench and on the left side of the bench, maybe a tiny bit on the castle, maybe a tiny bit on the tower bridge. But that's it. I would just be careful. And so that's the other thing. I'd be careful with color, but I'm also careful with detail, because it's really easy with HDR, because it can, if you're not careful, it can exaggerate the look of a photo in a significant way. And so if you're cranking up the detail as well, you're going to get a really exaggerated look. And as I said, I go for more what I consider enhanced realism, right? So just a thought there. So that's 4 tips. Now, to finish this photo, I got one more tip here in a moment. I had to add top and bottom tuning. So let me show you what I did there. Basically, that was also sort of controlling the light and a little bit of color. So that filter helps you kind of do a little bit of both light and color. And I didn't do anything on top, but in the bottom, I lifted the exposure a little bit on the bottom of the photo. Let me show you the orientation, pretty much right in the middle. And I took a little bit of warmth away from it. And there's the before, and there's with the filter. And I lightened it because I thought it was a little bit too dark, but I took away some of the warmth simply because I didn't want there to be too much of a contrast between how warm that is and how cool the rest of the photo is. So adding some cooler temperature to that bottom sort of helped me visually sort of blend those warmer tones that are coming off the light onto the cobblestones with kind of the bluer in the sky. I just felt like it went together a little bit better. There's the before and there's the after. Personal preference, you may not be able to tell, and frankly, you may not care. Just something I think about. And the other part of controlling color for me in Aurora is using the HSL filter. And there it is. And in this case, basically what I did is I took the saturation of the blue down. I did enhance it some with the color slider, and that was a global adjustment. For me, it made the blues a little too blue. So let me show you the before and the after. And I have to admit, I love blues. I love blue hour. It's my favorite time of day to shoot. And I'll make the blues kind of impactful in a photo on purpose. But I also like to sit on it and come back sometimes and say, all right, Jim, calm down a little bit. And in calming down, that often for me means toning down the blues. So that's part of the whole color thing that we've talked about. So far, 4 tips were getting the light right, be careful with your colors, mood is important, and watch for the details. And the 5th tip is noise. There's a little bit of noise in the sky. Now I got a ton of dust spots, and sadly you cannot remove those in Aurora. So I go to a Luminar for that, or I'd go to Snap Heel, or if you use Lightroom or something, you can do that. But for noise reduction, I add a new layer, and I'll open up denoise, and I'll adjust it to the extent that I think is necessary, and then I'll just go brush it in, and I'll show you. And here's the other thing about noise reduction. When you have a scene like this, when that tree is covering up that much of the sky, I don't even put noise reduction on it, simply because all it's going to do is soften up the look of the trees. No one's going to really be able to tell through the trees that there's maybe a little bit of noise in the sky. If you have an extreme amount of noise, then sure, it's going to be all over the photo, and you probably need to do something different. But in a situation like this was ISO 100 on a tripod, 3 exposures at blue hour, so no worries of real noise. So I just painted in over there, make some minor adjustments, 40 if you consider that minor. And it, excuse me, adds just a little bit of softness to the sky, which I like. And that's really it. I'm finished with the photo, except for the a few spots that you can probably see, that you could see for sure when on the last layer when I showed you the structure filter. But one of the great things is you can say plug in Luminar or plug in over here to Snap Heel. Either one of those is great at removing the spots. I'm not going to do that in this video, but that's what I would do next. Let me show you. Here's the center exposure, and there's the final finished photo. And one more time, center exposure and finished photo. And for those of you wanting to know, 3 exposures starting at -4 and then -2 and 0 is my last exposure. I generally almost always shoot to the darker side of things. ISO 100, 19 millimeters, f/22. And the reason I did f/22 is because all these people were walking by, and I wanted to extend the exposures a little bit so that they would ghost out. I was very lucky that this lady here pretty much stayed still through all 3 exposures, so that worked out pretty well. Anyway, that's 5 tips for making better HDR photos. There's the final product, and that's my workflow for this one. Hope it helps, my friends. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, comment, share, do all that stuff if you haven't yet, and I appreciate it. We'll be talking soon. I got more videos coming soon. Thanks for watching. Take care, and adios.